let's talk about what's going on with Trump. This Trump trial is really interesting. We got David Pecker back on the stand today and making this case about the hush money payments and how it's tied to trying to influence an election. What are your thoughts about what you've seen so far?
What I've seen obviously is a reporting from people who are in the courtroom, as well as the sketch artists who
Yeah.
come on television in the evening to talk about it as well. I think that what you can make of this, first of all, there's the bottom line, and the bottom line is that with Trump in court all day long, the political hurt is real. It means he's not in Wisconsin. It means he's not in Michigan. It means he's not in Pennsylvania. He's not in Nevada and Arizona and Georgia, and that doesn't help the nominee. So forgetting what the result of this trial is, because I don't pretend to know all the legalese. And look, the prosecution has been putting the case on so far, and the defense is going to be a strong defense, and people who are happy about what David Pecker is saying and the way it's going against Donald Trump in a week or two will be saying, oh, I'm worried that Trump's going to get off because of what we're hearing about what his defense is, as it always happens in a trial. I think a lot of what you're hearing from David Pecker, though, is exactly what the prosecutors want this case to be about. And in terms of whether or not this was interference in an election, they have made what seems to me to be a compelling case over this, and that's not going to help in terms of whether or not he is convicted. It seems like a jury is hearing it would hear it in the same way, but that's why there are 12 of them, and not all of us hear it in the same way. So, I would say that the biggest political impact thus far is that the nominee of the Republican Party can't campaign, and we know more about what happens. That right now is the bottom line.
Would you say, though, it's kind of this constant campaign where he might not be able to stop on campaign trails, but the news is on him every day? We're like, what happened at the trial? What do the pictures look like? What do the sketches look like? What's he saying on the courthouse steps? It's like free attention, really.
That's a good point, Kim. But what I would say is that it doesn't, that presumes that everybody is paying close attention to this. It also, and I've had this debate with people, including Mark, in texts about whether or not there should be cameras in this courtroom.
Yeah.
I think the fact that there are not cameras in this courtroom helps Joe Biden. I think it helps because you don't have Donald Trump out there, and the people. You get Donald Trump for 30 seconds on the way out of court every day, right? But the people who are part of the, you have to say, excellent spin machine on the right, the people that are able to tell those stories are not able to do that, because they can't say, look at what they're saying about Trump, look at the victimization, look at the lying that's going on, because nobody knows what's happening here. So to that end, I think that it hurts him, because while he is in the news and people are paying attention to it, people are paying attention to protests on the lawn of Columbia, and people are paying attention to Ukraine funding and Mike Johnson, and people are paying attention to the NBA and the NHL playoffs. So there's stuff that is distracting everybody as well. So there isn't this concentration on Trump, and you don't have footage to go back to and show over and over and over ad nauseum. So I think that hurts Trump.
Michael, if I could ask, and great points, by the way. Do you think Trump is getting special treatment in not being held in contempt for his disparaging remarks about lawyers, about the process? I know he's been warned, but it seems like, a mere mortal who is not a former president would have been slammed with just various penalties and or jailed by now for interrupting or throwing a wrench into the legal proceeding.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point, Hal. I think that he probably is. But by the same token, we wouldn't know, and we wouldn't be paying such close attention to anybody else. I think that this judge, by threatening it constantly, by putting these gag orders in, by having these gag orders upheld on appeal, I have to say that in a way is the contempt in which he has been held. I don't think that sort of jailing him overnight or fining him $400 or whatever is going to make as much of an impact as the constancy of pointing out that he is doing this. And it will affect, perhaps if he is found guilty, maybe that will affect sentencing in some way. my tendency is to think that even if he is found guilty, he's not going to get jail time. But he will be found guilty. He'll be a felon and all of that. But again, I think other people might have been given jail time, but I'm jumping ahead and I'm just guessing on that. But I see what you're saying. I agree with what you're saying, but I also think that there's something that isn't quite as normal when whatever we think of Donald Trump, he is a former U.S. president. When they're on trial, there's something different about it.
You mentioned that you think it behooves President Biden not to have the Trump trial broadcast. But I wonder if it deprives the American people of seeing Trump as a criminal defendant sitting at that table, right? Because the image of him, if we're really forced to look at the pictures over and over again, a live picture of him sitting where the criminals sit makes a statement.
It does, but again, who does that serve? Everybody who has their mind made up about what Donald Trump is has their mind made up.
Michael,
about
it serves me.
It serves you, Tim, and there's a pleasure to it, a perverse pleasure that a lot of people would get over it, a Schadenfreude, whatever it is. Yeah. I mean, I think Schadenfreude actually is wrong, because I think Schadenfreude has to do with someone you actually like having something bad happen to them, or maybe you get pleasure out of pain. I'm not sure on that, but the point is, we know that that's what's happening. We see sketches of it. By keeping his image as a victim, let's go to the other side, as a victim out of it, I think is a very important thing, because they are very good at pointing out how Donald Trump is a victim on the right, how he is going through something he should not go through. Look what he's being put through. Look at the lies this prosecutor is saying every day. Look at how this judge, how about the judge? Remember when we all watched O.J. Simpson's trial, the judge was excoriated for the kind of treatment he was giving, Lancito giving to O.J. Simpson and the others. So if they see a judge being particularly harsh, going back to what Hal just said, if they see a judge holding him in contempt, they're going to say, oh my God, look what they're doing to our man, to Donald Trump. Victimizing Donald Trump is not something that would help Joe Biden. And I think that the absence of cameras there is a real debate. I think the absence of cameras there ensures that that's not going to happen to the degree it otherwise would.
Let's move to this presidential immunity hearing before the Supreme Court. And yesterday, it got really wild. We were talking a little bit earlier about how they were kind of going over the what ifs. And some Supreme Court justices were saying, well, what if he did this? And what if he did that? And the things were outrageous. Like, what if he planned a coup? What if he assassinated a rival? Like, these are wild, what ifs. And the Trump attorneys were like, well, yeah, that might rise to the it's okay under presidential immunity. And yet still, it looks like the Supreme Court might actually have some type of presidential immunity that they say is allowed.
Yeah, it doesn't look like they're going to go with blanket. And I hate reading their tea leaves, because very often these justices question the attorneys and the solicitor general and anybody who's party to a case in extremes. They ask things that they don't necessarily agree with, as a necessity for making their decision. So very often you do get surprises. But this court is a conservative court. And it seemed from the questioning yesterday, I think we all would agree that it looked like it was that some of the conservatives were considering some kind of presidential immunity here, if not blanket immunity, or at least sending it back to the courts, to the lower courts, which would delay everything and probably push this out past the election, which is what's discomforting to a lot of people. But I think that, man, like these people who are talking about these extremes, right? That the Second Amendment is an extreme. These are the people that listen to the Second Amendment about forming a militia against the government, right? And so these are the same types of people who are going to look at these extremes of what if they, what if something were to happen to the president, or what if the president was going to assassinate a rival, and protecting that seems like a really bad idea. But by the same token, there are 9 different opinions there. I was upset by the fact that it looked as if they're not going to just rule out presidential immunity. But I'm interested to hear when they make a decision, the people who think that there should be some, what they're trying to preserve. And again, it's a fool's errand to try and guess what's going to happen, but it's also tempting. And judging from yesterday, it seemed pretty clear. But look, it seemed clear in the Obergefell decision, which was the gay marriage decision. I didn't think that was going to go the way it did, based on the questioning in that decision, and it went the other way. So I think we wait, but we're not going to have to wait very long, because they know that this is a pressing issue in an election year.
Michael, I have a kind of a big picture question for you. Just, the fact that they're even having to address this in the Supreme Court, the fact that Donald Trump, the culmination of so many things, that he's on trial for a hush money, to a porn star. I remember the good old days when Howard Dean got in trouble for screaming, when Gary Hart was, pictures came out when he was on the boat, monkey business, Donna Rice. Like, do you think we can ever put the genie back in the bottle and get to a more civil political discourse, or is it only going to get wilder and weirder? Well, I know I'm asking you to predict the future. But.
Yeah, I think they're different, right? I mean, as a society, we've become, look, we fancy ourselves to be very puritanical, and we always have forever, but we are not that in America, right? I mean, maybe there are pockets of Utah where we are, but that's about it. And even they're not really. So I think that when you look at where we've come, and we'll go to Gary Hart particularly. I mean, if you think about Bill Clinton hemming and hawing over inhaling or not inhaling, Gary Hart being caught on a boat, what we accept now is very different. Also, what the other side accepts is very different. So the right has permitted all of this, yet they're the ones that are the family values party historically, but they've permitted Donald Trump to run roughshod through all the rules that they had set up for so long. Not only that, to win evangelical Christians, right? And to win them by a lot in 2016 and 2020. So will we ever put the genie back in the bottle? Putting the genie back in the bottle means taking some progress away, taking away the idea that, you can't smoke weed or have smoked weed or anything like that. But you remember George Bush, he seemed to have evaded, George W. Bush seemed to have evaded military service. He had a DUI, if I'm not mistaken. And he, and that didn't seem to matter. He had I think a avowed drug problem. Barack Obama, we should say, in his book after his presidency, and I may be wrong about that, but I think it was his book after his presidency where he admitted to having used cocaine or tried cocaine in college. All those things which would have excluded them from the presidency at any turn have become more acceptable. So if you put the genie back in the bottle, which never happens, nobody can ever do that. I think it takes us backwards a little bit too. And the hypocrisy, though, would be something that would be nice to erase, because there is a real hypocrisy. There was then, and now it's being accepted on the right with this guy for some curious reason. But I think when he goes, a lot of that goes with him too.
So I was texting back and forth with Mark last night. We do every night because we talk about the thumbnail, the picture that we use for the show, and etc. He said that High Court's ruling is likely to require lower courts to separate out Trump's official acts from his private ones. And he goes on to say that means that if that happens, it's a stall. It won't happen by Election Day. It means the delay is successful, and it means basically Trump won this round, because that's what he was after, is a delay. Would you agree with that?
I mean, yeah, but I wouldn't, not with an exclamation point. I mean, I don't think it's a win to have the nominee of your party possibly convicted in New York and having to consistently be facing all of these allegations, these delays, these judicial decisions that are going to come out of lower courts, having to go back and appeal, not to mention that there are other cases. I mean, this is baggage in an election year. So did he win? Yeah. But I mean, also, in a sense, if he were to win in November and then he become president in January of 2026 or 2025, that the next day, a Democratic House could impeach him with good reason for being a felon, for doing all of these things. So there's a lot down the road that I think the election is impacted by this in whatever way it could, whether he's convicted or not. They're the people that are diehard, tried and true, the people that I immerse myself with on the campaign trail outside his events. They don't care what comes out of this. So he's not going to lose those people. And independents, you'd have to assume. I always say they're overplayed because I don't think there are that many of them that are waiting to decide on Donald Trump. But if there are, that this is, no matter what, a strike against him, because there's a constancy to it. So yeah, is it a win for Donald Trump? Yeah, he's not going to have to stand trial and be off the campaign trail as much if in fact this is what happens. But by the same token, it's going to be the background music to an entire summer of campaigning.
One thing I was fascinated by that came out of this hearing yesterday is this, and this is Sotomayor. She says, if we say that a president can't be included in a criminal law unless explicitly named, then that would bar the Senate from convicting him for high crimes and misdemeanors, because that means he's not subject to the law at all. She says, if he's not covered by criminal law, then he can't be impeached by violating it. So she calls it a catch-22, where Trump lawyers are saying, listen, if a president commits some violation, there's a system by which impeachment and conviction, that would be the way. But she says no, because if he's not covered by criminal law, then he can't be impeached by violating it. So that doesn't work.
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, it's not where it makes us all equal except for one person, right? And that's sort of anti-American, and I think that's the point that the prosecutors are trying to make here. Whether or not Sotomayor convinces anybody of that, I don't know, but no question that she's right about that. I mean, that's what this sets up, and there are people on the conservative side who think that's a good thing. But I promise you, if it was Barack Obama or Bill Clinton in this chair and not Donald Trump, it would be the opposite. And that's the politicization of the court that's happened. And that, going back to what I was saying before, that may be a genie that should go back in the bottle, but I don't know if that will ever happen.
Do you think Biden is doing enough as far as publicizing and talking about Trump's legal troubles, or do you think he's just being showing a little too much reservation there and respect for the legal process, letting it play out? Or should he be spiking the football more? And
can I answer this in November? It's a conscious decision their campaign has made to shore up their constituencies in as many places they can, and with as many rulings as they can, from union members, to environmentalists with what they did in Alaska, to students and young people for what they're doing on student loans. So they're trying to do the positive thing and let the other thing do its own damage. And so I don't know the answer. My tendency is to think that it can come up when it comes up, but if that's the whole tenor of the campaign, I think that's a juvenile way to run a presidential campaign, and I think it's sort of below the president himself. He's going to have enough surrogates out there doing it. I think that it's probably, if I were in the room and they were asking me to vote whether should we talk about it or not, I would say no. Let's do the stuff and let's talk about what we're doing, and then occasionally we can drop a remark or a retort or something like that mentions it. Do it in a subtle way, a passive way. But I think if that's your campaign, that's not good enough.
Right. And if I could piggyback on that. Because Michael, you mentioned courting young people with student loans, et cetera. And we've all seen that some of his support amongst young people, amongst Middle Eastern groups and some people of color is fraying because of U.S. aid to Israel. And, Biden has taken some hardline tactics, but then Israel just got a windfall passed in the House and Senate. So do we see that changing, evolving, and where do you see that going for Biden there? Because that's pretty big.
I think if he were in a vibrant primary, that it would have made a huge difference. I
Hmm.
think it's lucky for him that he is not. I think in a general
Yeah.
election against somebody who put in a Muslim ban, against somebody who has shown no real deference to African Americans, though he says it, I think that then it would hurt more. I think what Biden has to do is he has to make sure that black voters show up. I think that any presidential campaign that counts on young voters is misguided. Young voters don't vote as much, right? They're just we know for whatever reason they're the ones that are on the lawns at these universities. They're the ones that are in the streets complaining about whatever issue is of the moment, yet getting them to the polls is still a challenge. And getting them to the polls when you have two basically octogenarians running for president
Yeah.
is even harder. So it's going to be a heavy lift for the president getting normal Democratic constituencies out. What they are counting on, though, is that the Dobbs decision is going to bring enough young female voters out that it will outweigh that. Also, you're going to get some surrogates who are Muslim to be out there for the president and say, look, as much of a hard time as we have with what he's doing in Israel, we know that Trump is the author of the Muslim ban. We know that Trump wants nothing more than to be friends with Israel. So we can weigh our options here and say neither is ideal. But if we're going to have to vote, we're going to vote for the person who is at least trying to hold Israel to task in a way, even if it's spineless or whatever they may see it as. It's not enough. Then I think that will even out. That's an optimistic way of looking at it, and I think it's a good question. It's certainly something Democrats need to wonder about. But they really have to do what they're doing now, which is to make sure that it's get out the vote, get out the people that we rely on every single time, because if we don't get them out, then we're not going to beat them, and they're going to try and get out whoever it is that they need to get out and make sure that they're coming to the polls. So it's a tough spot, but every election's tough.
Yeah.
I know our Michael Shore time is coming to a close, but I wanted to ask you something that I heard this morning, which was apparently President Biden sat down with Howard Stern and said, yeah, he'd be willing to debate Donald Trump. Do we need a Trump Biden debate? Do we already kind of know the difference between them? Does it have any value to us?
I mean, yeah, I haven't heard Howard's interview. Yes, I think we always want the debate. We always should be able to hear what a president says. I think it's an opportunity for President Biden to show that he's on top of these issues and knows what's going on. It's also an opportunity for President Biden to see his opponent make a fool of himself. For Donald Trump, it's an opportunity to have President Biden look too old to be president, to mock him, to do the things that he does, which we have to say he's done to success in the past. So, and I always think it's better to have a debate than to not have a debate, even though we probably do know. I mean, we haven't learned much from debates in a very long time. It's not about what we're going to do when it comes to the Geneva Conventions or how we're going to operate NATO, or whether or not this many million barrels of domestic oil have to. It's never those aren't the headlines the next day. The headlines are always that Mike Pence had a fly on his head, right? But I think seeing these people in action is probably important to the process.
And I lied. One last question, because it just popped up on the headlines for CNN. Antony Blinken is telling CNN that the United States has seen evidence of China attempting to influence upcoming U.S. elections. How worried should we be this time around of other countries sticking their fingers in our election pie? And how do we protect ourselves as voters trying to look for the right information?
Okay, you are asking the wrong guy, but I think that we should be worried in increasing ways now because of AI, because of how easily manipulable these systems are.
Right.
And it's both a political thing. I think, Democrats needing to look strong against China when Republicans say that they are in bed with China. I think so. I think there's a backstory to Blinken doing this, but I also think that it's probably true, and that I think that we are probably subject to more tampering in our election than existed before from foreign agents. But again, like I opened with, you're asking the wrong guy. I really don't know, but that's just me just sitting on the couch saying, yeah, it's probably easier to do it now than it ever was, and we have to make sure that we prevent that as much as we can.
Well, I know it's what, the hockey playoffs, so it's a big thing
It
that
is.
you had time to join us
Oh,
today.
tonight.
Are
Who's
you a
playing
Knicks
tonight?
fan
Who
as
are you?
well?
I'm not a big NBA fan. I mean, I was a
Right on.
Knicks fan when I was in New York, but I'm the other sports fan.
All right, let's go Rangers. I
All right,
saw
let's go.
Mark Messier on TV the other night. That guy has not aged.
My
I don't-
God, how good does Mess look? He's just like
Right?
and
He can still get
strong
out there.
and serious and terrifying. All of that. Yeah, it was great.
All right, go
right.
Rangers, since the Sharks aren't in it, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
The Sharks are in it, but which, by the way, you can put at the end of any NHL conversation.
That's
Because
sad,
anybody
Michael Shore. That's sad.
since the Sharks aren't in it, but one day they will. All right,
Michael
guys.
Shore, thank you for being
Thank you.
here. You're awesome, and we love you. Have a great afternoon.
you.
Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.